Well, speaking of the genocide and the ongoing ethnic cleansing of Palestine, Donald Trump made some comments during the visit with Netanyahu that sort of spoke to this, Rania, that have caused major diplomatic ructions all over the Middle East. I think we may have a clip of Trump's comments that I'd like to some of Trump's comments I'd like to play, and then get into some of the implications of this.
The only reason the Palestinians want to go back to Gaza is they have no alternative. It's right now a demolition site. This is just a demolition site. Virtually every building is down. They're living under fallen concrete that's very dangerous and very precarious. They instead can occupy all of a beautiful area with homes and safety, and they can live out their lives in peace and harmony instead of having to go back and do it again. The U.S. will take over the Gaza Strip, and we will do a job with it, too. We'll own it and be responsible for dismantling all of the dangerous unexploded bombs and other weapons on the site, level the site and get rid of the destroyed buildings, level it out, create an economic development that will supply unlimited numbers of jobs and housing for the people of the area. Do a real job, do something different, just can't.
So, Rania, Donald Trump's proposal is for the U.S. to colonize Gaza, to remove all of the Gazans, to take all of the area and turn it into an economic development site. Now, of course, the administration's been trying to walk this back and say it's just a temporary removal. But of course, this has created mass panic in close U.S. allies, Egypt and Jordan, because those are the two most obvious areas Palestinians would go to. They do not want that. Palestinians do not want to leave. Anyway, now there's all these ructions. But your thoughts on Trump's comments?
I mean, it was just the most bizarre press conference on so many levels, but so are most things that happen in Trump 2.0 era, I guess. The theatrics of it, I mean. But logistically speaking, I don't think this is logistically possible. Because of what you just said. I mean, Jordan and Egypt would be the obvious places that Israel's dream is to send the Palestinians of Gaza into Egypt and take over Gaza. And then, of course, then the Palestinians in the West Bank to ethnically cleanse them into Jordan. These are red lines for the Jordanians and the Egyptians. Biden actually tried to sell that policy to the Egyptians when the genocide in Gaza began. And they said back then, they said, no, I mean, I don't think there is any amount of money you can give Egypt to accept ethnically cleansed Palestinians into their territory. Not because the Egyptian government cares about Palestinians. Obviously, they don't. They have normalized with Israel. It's a dictatorship funded by the U.S. to suppress its population from doing anything that challenges U.S. hegemony and Israeli hegemony in the region. But they do see Palestinian refugees inside their territory as a potential security threat, especially if their leadership is Hamas, who they see as an extension of the Muslim Brotherhood. So it's just not something that Egypt is going to allow. They see it as a destabilizing force. And the same goes for Jordan. And you've seen them reiterate repeatedly since Trump has been making these comments over and over again that they will not be allowing the displacement of Palestinians into their territory. You even saw Saudi Arabia release a statement after Trump made these comments, signaling that they would oppose this as well. So it's not logistically possible. On top of that, it is blatant, brutal ethnic cleansing. There's no way to cover that up. I mean, I know the New York Times would like to cover it up, even though they hate Trump so much. They just said displacement. That's ethnic cleansing is what Trump is calling for. It's just blatant, brutal colonialism. And you know what? I guess it's at least somewhat refreshing to see it said out loud about like what it is rather than these like silly terms that you'll hear from, people who like to put a mask on everything depraved that the US and Israel do. The other thing I'll add is that the entire Western imperialist system spent 15 months pouring billions and billions and billions of dollars in weapons into Israel to decimate Gaza and eliminate Palestinians either by killing them or pushing them out. It didn't work. So after 15 months of the most advanced weaponry that humans have been able to create, was not able to do that. I'm not sure why this proposal in the minds of these people seems workable. It doesn't to me. They're going to run into resistance. People fought and died to stay in Gaza, and they will do it again if they have to. And as we saw, Israel did not defeat Hamas. There is still resistance in Gaza. So I just think it's not serious. It's very dangerous. If Trump and his administration and the Israelis were to try to impose this final solution, because that's what it looks like, that's what it is, a final solution in Nazi terminology, onto Gaza, the repercussions would be completely unpredictable, but incredibly destabilizing for the entire region.
No, I think that's a very good point. I mean, I don't even know who came up with this. I mean, part of why Trump is walking this back is not just the allies of the United States in the middle, in the West Asia, and North Africa, but even inside of the Republican Party. Lindsey Graham, who has been one of the most pro-genocidal individuals over the entire course of the Israeli genocide there in Gaza, of course, basically justifying the Israeli actions by comparing them to the atomic bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So giving you a sense, like one of the most genocidal people, he actually stated that no senator of either party supports this, that it was a total non-starter. Rania, I wanted to get your thoughts on another issue. You already mentioned this Trump USAID, attacks on USAID, which have brought a lot of different types of opposition, but it's also brought into the conversation some of the more sort of regime change type elements that are under USAID. Chris Murphy, the senator from Connecticut, actually has been one of the number one people sort of promoting this. Before we get into this, I want to just play a clip of Senator Murphy.
So Congress writes a law that dictates how USAID spends money to make sure that we're countering Chinese influence inside Africa, to make sure that we don't lose access to critical mineral supplies, so that we're fighting back against Hezbollah in Lebanon.
Well, there it is, Rania. I think there's a few things to say about this. The first thing I think that's important in terms of framing it is it's at least finally proving what many of us have said for many years, that USAID is a form of imperialist soft power, and that it does many things which many people find unobjectionable. That's why it's soft power, because, some of the things are giving people food, people are in famine, things like that. But that nestled under that, it's always been a vehicle for cover identities for the CIA, for its own programs that are aimed at different forms of regime change, major funding of media abroad to shape the narrative in countries in a more pro-US direction. So that's being proven true. But, the thing about it, Ronnie, that is notable to me is the very fact that Chris Murphy and others feel this is the way that they have to defend USAID lets you know that Donald Trump's attack on USAID are in a way about something different. And I think that's what's important to note about this. Like, the way you look at how they're attacking it, it basically is designed to bolster many of the already existing narratives of the Trump administration to back their billionaire agenda, specifically by using racism in a divisive way. Like when you look at the White House press secretary, when she's running down the list of USAID programs that are bad, that they don't like. By the way, some of them weren't even USAID programs. But that being said, it's all about DEI, so it's building into that narrative. Obviously, when they're targeting it, they are targeting the humanitarian aid aspect, and they're trying to make it seem like, wow, how terrible that America would give food to non-white people in the global South who are suffering from famine and hunger. Trump also this morning opening up an attack on the funding on the US media by USAID. And of course, we at Breakthrough News are no fans of the mainstream media. But the reason why Trump hates the mainstream media is because they truthfully report on many of his misdeeds, and he doesn't want to do that. So in a way, I feel I can understand that some people are like excited about this, like, oh, they're going after USAID, but they're not going after it because of all the like CIA spook regime change stuff. They're doing it in order to continue to build the racist narrative around quote unquote DEI, which basically means let's make sure the government does nothing to address the historic and ongoing discrimination against Black people in particular and many others in the United States. Let's also make sure that the US government does nothing to help anyone in the global South suffering from climate change, hunger, poverty, or anything like that. And let's also try to muzzle the media as much as we possibly can so that the billionaire agenda of Trump and his friends who are trying to rip off working class Americans and make it a lot easier for corporations to jack up prices, lay people off, bust their unions, make it less safe on the job, that won't get reported on. That is what they're hoping to do with this attack on USAID. And then they're going to move it under Marco Rubio inside of the State Department. And as you mentioned earlier, I mean, this is Mr. Regime Change. So, as much as people want to maybe celebrate this, and I can understand that given some of these other aspects. I think it's deeply pernicious, and it's all of a piece with everything we're seeing from Trump, which is designed to bolster an agenda that, again, at its core is designed to rip off average, everyday working class Americans, transfer trillions of dollars to the richest people in this country, and cut many of the most critical programs that help people survive on a day-to-day basis. And I think we have to keep that context in mind when we consider what's happening here, and recognize the U.S. will never stop regime change under any context, in any circumstance, as long as the government is imperialist. So if you think that's what's happening, that's not what's happening. And Chris Murphy will get what he wants. They will reassure him that Ukraine, Congo, all of that will be safe. But, ultimately it'll be, anyway, to the benefit of Trump's narratives.
I mean, I think that I agree with everything you said, and I'll add to it. I mean, this is just a contradiction in the ruling class, right? Like they're not in agreement on a very theatrical thing, which is obviously the end game is U.S. domination of the world's resources. Chris Murphy is of the liberal imperialist flavor. And he feels he's that mindset of we have to do this under the auspices of humanitarianism and human rights and equality and all of these things. Like diversity and inclusion is a part of that liberal imperialist order. Like we want there to be people of all backgrounds carrying out imperialism. We want to make space for all of them. And then we also want to have these programs that give us cover for, like, yes, we do care about democracy building and civil society and human rights. Whereas that sort of, Trumpian, Republican, right-wing version of imperialism is just more brazen, more in your face, more Marco Rubio style, actually, where, yeah, they want to play the culture war game because that's a part of their domestic agenda and in their global agenda in many ways as well, to use that as a divisive issue. But also they just want to be more straightforward and brutal. They still want to go after China. They still want to regime change Russia, whatever Trump says, like the U.S. imperialism wants to do what U.S. imperialism wants to do. They still want to install the dictators they want to install in Latin America. They just have a more brazen, in your face, direct, and also like sort of hollowing out money making way of doing it, because they also want to make money off of all that government money that's going to these kinds of programs. So it to me, it looks like a theatrical performance. Yes. Do I enjoy seeing certain programs get shut down or temporarily, I should say, stop functioning in a place like Lebanon that work to undermine this country's sovereignty that I'm sitting in right now? Sure. I guess I'll get some popcorn and watch that. But at the end of the day, this is not some attack on the regime change imperialist system at all whatsoever. It's kind of just like a vying for power of who gets to run it and of who the resources go to exactly. And of just, who gets to be in charge. That's it. Of who gets to be in charge and what the overall ideology of it is.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I think the thing I'll close on is to speak to your point of it's just who's going to control it. They're not changing the name. They're just going to say move it under State Department. So it'll still be USAID. So they'll still be using aid programs to cover CIA type situations. So that definitely will not change. And Sam Sachs from Means Morning News pointed this out about the memo where they were telling people who had to come into work. And it was like, people who are mission critical and also people attached to specialty programs. And the question he was raising, which I think is, underlining a lot of what we're saying, he said, I wonder what those specialty programs are. So, I think we can see what's really going on here. And I think it speaks to the need for independent politics in the United States. I think so many people are always looking for either the Democrats or the Republicans to come with some agenda that's going to do something. They're trying to find some silver lining in this, that, or the third. But as you said earlier, the issue of agency, I think we have to take our agency back, and we have to develop a politics that can say we should stop sanctioning, going to war, invading, regime changing these countries and all those types of policies. But we actually should be working with people in the global south to address the challenges of hunger, famine, climate change, poverty, immigration, and so on and so forth. And those things we can do those things. They are mutually exclusive. We can get rid of regime change. In fact, we kind of have to if we want to improve the lives of people and help address them. But the idea that we should just, abandon the great challenges of humanity in our time, I think is ridiculous. But we can make that case to people in a way that I think is compelling, but it has to be made, and we can't be looking for the Democrats or for the Republicans or for whoever. We can't just let them set the tone and set the agenda for how every issue is viewed. So